Welcome back to the Long Way Back podcast. I'm your host, Timmy Long, joined today as my co-host by Donald Clifford.
Nice
Hi, Donny.
Thanks for having me
So
again.
today we have Gus Murray. Gus is, you worked in CIT for years. Gus is in the psychotherapy and counselling course, and today we're going to have a chat about psychotherapy, how it's transformed from the beginning when you started with it back in the 90s to what it is today. And we're also going to have a chat around maybe the developmental process of people and why people go down that rabbit hole of addiction, you know. And that's what it is. That's what it was, not understanding why we actually feel the way we feel and using addiction then as in the one thing to soothe us and to get us through a lot of stuff. So when did you actually start out on your own journey in psychotherapy, Gus?
Professionally, 1990, 1991.
Okay.
I started the CIT. I started a course in CIT in 1991, working professionally, meeting clients and all that, roughly about a couple of years before that.
Okay. So it kind of...
It was very much the infancy of the whole field in Ireland.
Yeah. And what is your understanding of the developmental process of beings and people who go down that path of addiction? And like we know there's a lot of there's developmental trauma and different things and intergenerational stuff as well. So can you break that whole process down for us, please?
Oh yes, I think I could hopefully attempt to do it anyway.
Thank you.
I think it is important that we don't limit it to addiction, but to recognize that there are various different, what I would call survival mechanisms that people take up to cope with things that aren't optimal for them. So I see addiction and I see all sorts of other kind of survival methods as ways of trying to soothe the pain that might be happening for people inside. So your question then is, how does the pain get to be there in the first place? And I think that, loosely speaking, the term that captures the scope of it for me is various elements or levels of developmental trauma. And what I mean by that now is not as if somebody gets hit over the head. The first part of it is how the infant, I mean, we could go back before birth, but just to begin with birth, how the infant is received, is met as they arrive in the world. Now, it's really important that we don't start saying it is somebody's fault.
Yeah.
Because everybody is, all the parents are receiving their babies, receiving their infants in the best way that they can with the apparatus and the resources that they have available. And that's where, of course, you bring in the transgenerational kind of thing, what has passed on to them and what they're bringing to the next level and so on. But essentially, one of the things I think that's very fundamental is if there is an attunement, if the infant feels a sense of being got, being met, being felt, being connected with. And that can go down to very basic things in the very initial stages, like what happens when the child looks towards the caregiver. I don't even want to say the mother, because that's going to put the focus too much, I think, on, it's the mother's fault. And that's too widespread.
That's a good point.
Yeah, it's so widespread. I don't want to do that, because I think mothers, it's a very easy kind of a guilt trip to land. So what I'm saying is that the infant has no worked out anything in their mind. They haven't even developed emotions. They just landed in the world, and there's an instinctive thing to look to go for suckling, to go for looking for the eyes. And the attunement that the infant meets in that engagement, how does the baby know who they are? They find it out from the mother's eyes. How does the baby find out? Who am I? I get to know who I am by the response I get from the mother's eyes. And that's the starting point, I think. Very, very often in, compromised circumstances, there's a deficit in that. And the child might have colic, or there might be 3 more children, or whatever else that there is. But essentially there's a compromise. And the child starts to feel initially rage, because that's the normal response. You look for something, you don't get it. The normal response is you feel rage. And that doesn't yield any response. You don't get anything back. And the rage has no place to go. So that's shut down. And the shutting down of that in the attachment period is the starting point very often for what later turns out to be a lot of unresolved need that isn't met. And there is an emptiness, there's yearning, there's an attempt to find other ways to cope and survive. And that's where all these other obsessions that we develop, anxieties that we develop, the kind of things that move, that progress from there. That would be the starting point that I would say. We're learning it in many ways. We're learning it in the clinical room. We're learning it from people's stories, and we're learning it from the scans that are being done on people's brains, recognizing that the networks that were needing to be developed, they didn't get it. They didn't get it. When you do a scan, when the brain scan is done in somebody who has a compromised early life, you can see that there are huge gaps in where the connections are.
And so those gaps are just dormant, kind of, there's no energy in that area.
That's right.
There's no connections between the different neural pathways.
Exactly.
I have seen some of them scans on different documentaries and channels on YouTube. There's a guy by the name of Dr. Amen.
Yeah.
Have you heard of him?
I do.
I've seen some of the scans, and I looked into a lot of that stuff, and it gave me a lot of understanding about my own brain and what's working and what's not working. But for example, say if a child has a difficulty with attachment with the parent, how does that affect not just the child but the adult going forward?
Well, yes. So we're living. We're living with needs that haven't been met, and they generate a sort of a pain inside that's shut down, and we look for other ways then to prevent the pain from coming through, so that we shut it away, and we have to try to find a way to cope instead. So we put our head into the sport, or we put our head into the modern times, into the phone, or into other activities that try to keep us from feeling the pain.
Yeah.
That probably is, or depending on the individual, then we might get into it's very hard to when your developmental needs haven't been met. The focus goes on survival. So learning and going to school and participating in the school and in education and learning it doesn't get first place. So they can get into difficulty, for example, in their learning.
Yeah.
They can get into difficulty with the teachers, and they can be put outside the door or sent to some place like this timeout room.
Yeah.
And all these other sort of places. And you will see more and more of that in what we call disadvantaged areas than you would have in more developed areas. So that's the issue as well, is that there is a factor about the kind of the community, the levels, say in the family and in the community, the levels of deprivation and resources that are available are better in some quarters, not as well developed in others. And all of those things join up together to set somebody on course. I remember hearing John Lonergan, he was the governor of Mountjoy. He said that he often, visits communities and school. He used to visit schools. He said he could nearly predict
Yeah.
who would arrive
Yep.
based on those kind of patterns. The likely possibility of getting to prison was more prominent in certain places and less so in others.
And that's go on. Sorry.
So can I come in there just to clear it up, so to make it just very clear? So what you're saying there is that there's a pattern that if for some reason there's, we'll say the parent is in some difficulty, the child in some way interprets that, takes it on board themselves, they adjust to it, they go out in society, and in some way in society, the child then finds themselves trying to navigate that deficit. And say, for example, you gave an example of school, where lots of us would have had difficulty in school. The child, that message the child maybe already has to some degree, almost gets reinforced in society, and the child is left with some, we'll say, negative view of itself. Is that a very simple summary of it?
It's not at all simple. You said something very important in it, that depending on the response the child gets, if it's negative in one form or another, the child takes that inside as a statement about them. So in other words, the very fact that the child is left to lie in the pram or in the whatever, the cot or whatever it is, and there's nobody gives them attention. Nobody says we don't care about you. But the child feels as if that's the story because there's nobody actually attending to them. And so even though the child hasn't worked it out in their head, I must be a bad person, it's like it's what gets concluded in their emotional response, in their state of being. They conclude there's something wrong with me.
That makes so much sense. And a lot of people will be able to relate to that and probably didn't know that information before.
Because would we meet people who would be, they just have a sense of, but they don't have a story to go with it.
Yes.
They don't have a clear memory of when something happened. And I think tying into some of the stuff, the mindfulness is what I find absolutely amazing for this. There's a story held somewhere in the body, or a sense of, and that's kind of the formation of your story. It's not that you were ever told in the buggy that you aren't good enough, but you have a sense of, like, in some way you'll come up with a story. Is that kind of bringing it together?
Absolutely. I call it the conclusion. It's not actually worked out. It's concluded. Yeah. This must be what
experienced.
It's experienced as if this is the truth about me. Yeah, absolutely.
And it's not that doesn't happen on an intellectual level.
Absolutely not.
Right. And while you're talking about that there, it just brings me to something else. And it's how our core beliefs are developed about ourselves. Like the child, no one coming to his attention, the child a few years later going into school because there's a lot of difficulties at home and maybe on the street or whatever. They're inside in school and they're struggling with education. Then another belief starts to develop there around the education, that they're not able for it, they're stupid and all these different things. And that's how it developed for myself. But then because of other difficulties that's going on inside the home, neglect, abuse, physical, mental, emotional, sexual, all these different things happening to kids inside, then there's other beliefs that stemming from that stuff then. So, like say, for example, there's a child has all of these, when you bring in the adverse childhood experiences into all this, like, and it's just like everything is happening to this child, not just a few different things. Like, that's when a child just has to start cutting off and disconnecting emotionally from everything. And that's my own story. I disconnected because all of these different things were going on. Emotionally, I didn't know what was going on for me because it was coming from every angle, here, and here.
So can I, if I don't mind, Gus, because now we have Gus here, can I kind of get maybe to clear up something? So some people, they might come from very similar households, environments, all this, okay? Some people will make a decision, will say, like Tim, I'm going to get on in the world, whatever it takes, okay? And other people then make other decisions and they maybe give up, they have mental health problems. Can you Can you say a little bit about that, Gus? Because Tim's story is very clear and it's very common in the kind of work that we do and the people that I meet. But what's not so common is the understanding around people who make the opposite decision, who maybe make the decision to kind of give up. Could you say a little bit about that?
That's interesting.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. Excuse me. There are so many pieces in that, I think, that are really important. How come some make it, some don't?
Yeah.
There used to be a sort of a silly little anecdote in one of our books going back, that the mother had 2 sons, and she said, "You'll end up in the asylum." And they did. One as a psychiatrist, the other as a patient.
Oh.
And I think, how come one gets one and the other goes the other way? I think there are a couple of things here that are very fundamental. So I'm going to mention the word resilience. And the question is, how do we develop resilience? And I think temperament comes into it. So you're talking about the innate, that there are some people that seem to have, I'm not sure how we do it, but there are some people seem to have an innate sort of an inbuilt survival drive, survival, resilient quality to them, and they somehow go for it, and they do it. So that's one side. But very, very importantly, a lot of emphasis has been put on the adverse childhood experiences and so on. And rightly so. And we recognize the difference between what a colleague of ours calls the acts of omission and acts of commission. Acts of commission are abuses that were perpetrated, but acts of omission are things that you needed that you didn't get.
Yes.
Neglect and the emotional and all of that. But on the other side of it, there's a growing emphasis on the benevolent experiences that somehow we got. And attachment to significant others appears to be the biggest antidote. So if there was one person that got you, if there was one person that saw you and followed you, it might have been the teacher in preschool, it might have been an aunt, it might have been a grandfather. That can be a huge compensatory factor. And what the research is showing is that people who had relational wealth, is what they called it in the research, people who experienced a kind of an attachment, supportive experience in family and community, they could thrive even if there were many adverse experiences.
The one good person.
One good person, or other experiences that gave them...
Like sport, you mentioned sport.
Yeah. Gave them the sense that they had something going for them.
Yeah, some value.
Some value, some worth. And on the other side of it, that people who didn't have that, but even without adverse experiences, didn't thrive as well.
Mm. Yeah. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
You know, and there was something stuck out for me there then. And I see this happening to so many talented young people in sports and stuff. They get to a certain level in age, maybe 13, 14, and there's a lot of good things happening. They're getting trials for this club, trials for that club. And next, all of a sudden, something happens. They test drugs or they go drinking for the first time, and what happens is they get something from the chemicals or the alcohol that makes them feel better than they've ever felt before. And for me, that's what happened. I felt confident for the first time. I could talk to her. So shy I couldn't even talk to a girl, you know. And when that happened to me, it took complete control of my life.
And I suppose then for the outside society, they see that as he's throwing something away.
Yeah. But all I was doing really was getting something that I never had. I was getting something that all the other children had without touching a substance or alcohol. And it was like, for me to feel the same way as they were feeling, happy and everything
Confident,
else.
and each drug gives you a different feeling.
Everything.
Yeah.
I needed to continue doing this, and that's when my behaviours then escalated out of control, took off on a different angle, where a lot of them were able to kind of enjoy themselves and do it recreationally. Mine was like, no, I have to keep going and constantly keep going to be able to keep feeling the way I did. And that's when things then started going crazy, particularly with the alcohol at the beginning. The alcohol was and with the prescribed medication, they're both in different things. But when I was taking them together, I became violent, and I ended up in situations where my life could have been really, really badly ended through joyriding, through fucking climbing over walls, robbing, very big heights and stuff, really crazy stuff, and getting
so
injured.
the risk taking.
It was absolutely ridiculously bad, like where I had no consideration for my life or another life.
Yeah.
So that gets us to another mention of another thing that might be of use, and that's the notion of dopamine. Okay. That's the high. That's the lift. So, you get it through cutting, you get it through, risk taking, you get it. So there's
tattoos.
There's a drive to get the high, to offset the pain that's inside. And what you're talking about are various efforts to do that, because this gets you away from it. Now, I want to say something about this, because we can talk about addiction or any of these things and say how terrible they are. Actually, people wouldn't survive if it wasn't for them. And so in other words, it's an intelligent solution in a situation of dire need.
Yeah.
So in other words, it's an attempted way to survive when regular ways aren't working. And it's evolutionary. It's built into us to have this way of coping, that we, instead of falling flat, we find it. We follow this route. Now, the problem is, a very serious problem is, that they have secondary effects. And that's what you're talking about.
Yes.
How dangerous are all that. But the actual attempt in itself is actually an intelligent evolutionary response to survive when people's backs are put to the wall.
Yeah.
And when the normal ways aren't satisfying them, they aren't helping them to stay afloat.
Or they don't have the tools and resources that maybe somebody from maybe a more, I suppose, functional background might have. So like, I suppose if somebody's coming from a house that we know we're talking about, maybe there's some form of dysfunction there, or poverty, or whatever's going on there, that the parent can't give these resources to the child. And the child then, I think what I used to love was you used to always the little professor.
Yeah.
Your little professor would kind of wake up and say, there's another way. And you might see a fella on the street and he's doing this, or you might find another way, or I can get praises through playing soccer, or you'll find some way, but you would have found it maybe through crime, or you might have found it through school, but you'll find some way of kind of feeling part of or alive.
But who deserve huge credit are the various voluntary community sporting groups who have helped young people to find some journey, some pathway or direction that they can help them to develop. And 'tis along the same lines as they're the benign or benevolent experiences that offset some of the adverse experiences that they have had otherwise.
As an adult, for me, when I stopped using alcohol and drugs and gambling and everything, there was a lot of different stuff there. And, I could go as far as food and all these different things. When I stopped and when I talked to people about addiction, they said, yes, I have my life back. I can actually say that I actually don't think I ever had a life
Before.
I can't remember actually being aware of what life is. And when I hear that, I also said to people, like, because for years I thought there was something drastically wrong with me intellectually because I wasn't grasping things, and then I found out I had dyslexia and stuff, and that made a lot more sense, you know, because I thought I was actually after damaging my brain through the amounts of drugs that I was consuming and alcohol, you know. So is it actually fair to say, right, that someone can actually wake up in a life at the age of 32 and not have ever experienced awareness?
Oh, without a doubt.
And that's how it felt for me.
I would have no doubt whatsoever about that, or maybe like more than 32.
Yeah.
But you highlighting a couple of things there that we should take account of, and especially when we're having a conversation that's going out to different people. You mentioned, say, something like dyslexia.
Yeah.
I think there's a great expansion in our appreciation of what is generally spoken about as neurodiversity. And that means that it isn't necessarily only all coming from the environment and the adverse experiences people have. And people are restricted by particular individual personal difficulties that can actually be helped. And there are quite a number of people who are discovering. I was talking to somebody just recently. She's a colleague of ours in the UK, and she said, "I'm an ADHDer." And she said, and it was the greatest freedom I found was to realize that that's the way I was. And she said one of the ways that was highlighted to me was, or the way I began to become aware of it was, I was procrastinating. That's a feature of it. And she said, suddenly I could understand it. And I have a compassion, and it took away the guilt that I'm not making the effort.
Yeah.
This is actually a condition that I have. And it doesn't mean that you then suddenly do this or do that, but becoming aware of it is quite helpful.
And I was just going to say that becoming aware of ADHD and that you procrastinate does not stop procrastination. No. It is, trust me, it is one of the most difficult challenges that I've ever had to, especially. And the procrastination really comes from things that I don't enjoy doing, like assignments for college, you know. So procrastination is definitely one of the biggest things for people with ADHD.
Is there I wonder, is there kind of a sense at the moment that it's going through its own kind of taking on its own life force, where more people than ever are being diagnosed?
100%, 1,000,000%. Yeah. But I'll tell you one other thing, and I'll be very, very, very vocal about this. If anybody's listening, if you are ever going away to get an assessment, okay, do not, and I mean this now truly, do not get assessed online by any of these organizations, these doctor onlines and these other organizations that I won't mention, because you will get the worst experience of your life. If you want to get diagnosed, go away to the websites like ADHD Ireland. There's recommended psychologists and psychiatrists online, and you can do a full assessment online with them. But they're
do your research is what you're saying.
You have to. I had two awful experiences with two separate psychiatrists. I done 3 assessments for the ADHD because I wasn't happy. Even though they diagnosed me with ADHD, I wasn't happy with the whole process of it. Yeah. And it actually nearly drove me back to addiction. You know, and for anybody that's listening here, that's in recovery, and I thought I'd be fine. That's in recovery for addiction. Okay, there are ADHD meds that you can take, right? But be very, very conscious of this. Okay, there is a massive push towards taking more of them when you're on them, and using other stimulants like cans of energy drinks, Monster, all, and more amounts of coffee. And it's very important that people know this, because a lot of these organizations that are getting people to do the assessments online, they actually do not care about you. Yeah. Trust me on that. All they want is to fill their pockets and get you in and get you out and get you prescribed, and that's it. There's no aftercare. There's no report for a lot of them. You need to be very, very careful.
So that's coming back to what I wanted to talk to Gus about is there a fear, Gus, that people will confuse or misdiagnose, say, ADHD, ADD, any of these
Yes.
with PTSD or trauma? Or see, that's my concern, is that there's such a lean now and a push on it that everyone now is looking to be diagnosed with something.
Yeah.
And my concern is that the assessments aren't broad enough, and they're very narrow, and they're looking at something through a very narrow lens.
I would agree very much. Actually, I was going to respond to what Timmy was saying, because you've been highlighting experiences of developmental trauma that you yourself have lived through.
Yeah.
And now you've been highlighting the experience, the diagnosis of ADHD. But it's not one or the other. And that's the point that Donald is making. Both of them are, so in other words, there's a dual diagnosis running. And when you were talking about doing the reluctance to do assignments, and talking about that as procrastination from ADHD, it can also be, it's not taking from that, but it can also be a protective system we have learned over years, because we have a part of us saying, listen, keep away from that, because it's only going to show you up what you don't know.
That's so true.
And so that's another, that can be there aside from there being a propensity to it because of ADHD. Survival defenses
Strategies.
they're legionary. We all have them. And the more we've had to survive in our lives to cope and survive, especially in education, the more likely it is that when you go towards doing something that demands, learning and figuring things out in an intellectual way, your protector against doing that is going to be kicking in.
Yeah. It makes so much
So
sense.
I think it's not either or, it's both. And they need to be held together.
Yep.
I would have certainly come from the tradition of assuming that we don't go towards the ADHD line if there's developmental trauma.
Yeah.
Now, I'm not saying that any longer, because I believe both are needing to be legitimately held together.
I've actually heard that before from a psychologist. She actually spoke that like it's very hard to differentiate whether what's going on for you is genuinely ADHD or developmental trauma, where something gets so difficult to your nervous system's actually not able to respond in a positive way and in a calm way to be able to get you to sit and process the information. Because when I sit and look at stuff like this, I'll give you an example. 2 weeks ago, we had a beautiful Saturday, and I was inside in the shed. I sat in my shed, which is my office, Thursday morning and started my assignments. Thursday went. I found every single excuse possible to get up off that chair. Make a cup of tea, you're hungry. Take a break here, you'll be grand. You're supposed to take a break because the doctor said take a break every half an hour for 10 minutes. All these things were coming into my head. 2.5 days later, I was still on the actually question of the assignment. I was still trying to figure it out. And I'm not kidding with you.
Oh, yeah.
I sat there and I put everything down and I sat there and I just looked at what was going on for me as Timmy, as a human being. And I said, is everything that's going on for me at the moment doable, number one? And what's causing me a lot of stress, number two? And I had to look at it. I had to look at my whole life. I dropped the masters there and then. I sent an email to my lecturer. Said, I'm not able for it this year. I have too much going on. I'm not able. I dropped another thing. I was going for a job with a different organisation. And I had to look at the pros and cons of that and me genuinely just staying in the construction industry and working for myself. Yeah. And I think there's a big part to play at working for myself, because I need that extra bit of time for me. Yeah. Right? And I made 2 decisions on that day that have changed my life. Yeah. I feel so freer. You wouldn't believe it.
I do.
I'm telling you now.
Too.
I took these things out of my life because I wanted to do all these things.
Yeah.
You know, not considering my own well-being.
Yeah.
You know, just considering what I could do and all. And I'm very conscious of this then too, of filling the void, Gus, Rondell, that I just got away from. You know,
That has
filling
happened in the
that
past.
void.
Yeah.
That is a pattern with me.
Yeah.
Sure. And there are sometimes we again in the books we would have talked about those as drivers. They come in and it's like they provide you with follow this and you'll
Be okay.
be okay. You
There's
won't
a
feel the
sense
pain.
of- there's a sense of being okay. As long as I'm achieving something in that, like that's my sense of being okay there. Do you know?
It's powerful stuff. Like going back to the core belief systems, Gus, a little bit. You know, how does an adult change them? How can an adult change their core beliefs? Firstly, do you think that they should understand core beliefs and how they're developed? And how do they actually change them as they go on in their adult life and they're conscious of them? Like, because there are really difficult things to change about yourself. I'll give you an example how I changed one. I got an assessment for dyslexia. I had this internal voice telling me I was stupid every time I was trying to do something in college or whatever. And then when I got my assessment and it came back that I was dyslexic and I'd done some research on it, everything clicked. Then this belief system that I had that I was stupid and I wasn't smart, that there was something wrong with my brain started to slowly disappear. Just started to drop. And I started to get more confident then. How do you think we do it as human beings?
Okay. Yeah, I mean, it's a really important question. First of all, what you're talking about, core beliefs, are the conclusions you come to about yourself. Some of the language talks about what they call schemas. They're not just thoughts. They're felt. They're in the body. They're emotions that are in the body. They're a global sort of a sense of yourself. Now, how can you change them? I think there are many ways to change them. I was remembering the story of a man that he did time in prison. He went to school and he did education and he did lots of things. And he was due to be released. He was due to be discharged. And he went to talk to the psychologist to thank the psychologist for the help that the psychologist had given him. So he called in. He said, "I'm being discharged. I'm released, and I want to thank you for what you did for me." So the psychologist says, "Grand, yeah, thanks." Because the psychologist had no idea he did anything for him.
Yeah.
So the psychologist thought about it and he said, he said, "I must have forgotten." He said, "Looked up, no." He said, "The only thing that I can see I did for him was I did an IQ test when he came in." So he followed him and he said, "Listen," he said, "I wonder, did you get something mixed up that I had helped you? Because I looked up my file." He said, "I could find nothing other than that I did your IQ test when you came in." "Oh no," he said, "you changed my life." He said, "How do you mean?" He said, "You told me that I was above average intelligence."
How big that plays in somebody's life.
And he said, "Up to that, I had always thought I was stupid." And he said, on foot of that, I went to enrolled to do the degree, and I got it, and I got a master's. Now, that's a very simple story because it's kind of gone through the thing of you're stopped in your tracks and you say to yourself, maybe it isn't true. Now, not many people will do it that way. The more likely thing that we're aiming to do is this. We're recognizing that this wasn't learned in any one place. And one terminology I would often use for it is what was one of the writers calls RIGS, R-I-G-S, repeated interactions that have become generalized. So in other words, as a result of growing up in the neighborhood where I grew up, as a result of the way that I was looked at by the teachers in school, as the way that I was looked at by the way the other neighbours and the other people in the other part of the town would not talk to us or play with us. The parents wouldn't let their children play with us. And I started to think, I'm
Faulty.
yeah, there's something wrong with me.
Yeah.
Now, what we're going to do then for therapy, which is what we're turning into in your question, is we're going to attempt to locate a representative memory or sample of memories that is holding this. So in other words, we're trying to change the program. And we're changing the program by, on the one hand, bringing up where it's being held, and at the same time holding something alternative opposite it. So in other words, this is where the neuroplasticity comes in. The notion that you can reach into the place that the program is stored, I'm not good enough. And at the same time, you begin to get contact with the fact that you have achieved something, that somebody thought well of you, that there are people who believed in you, that you have something going for you, that you've achieved something, and you're holding those two together. Now, we're using, that's where I mentioned again EMDR. We use that EMDR here because EMDR says that you'll resolve something of the core belief, the core emotional belief. You can resolve that if you can locate what they call the dysfunctionally stored memory or program, and at the same time bring up your adaptive, capable, intelligent self, and use bilateral stimulation then back and forth to get the neural networks, the dysfunctional material, the dysfunctionally stored, the networks holding the dysfunctional material to fire in the same zone as the ones holding the functional capability. And what they're saying then is neurons that fire together will start to wire together.
Yeah.
That this is so you're attempting, but this is not a one-off. This is you're taking slices, you're taking layers of it down all the time. You're bringing you're bringing experiences. You're saying, where does that take you back to? You open that up. You bring the positive resources online, and then you literally facilitate until layer by layer there's an adapt. And when we spoke earlier about the joining up the networks, that's what we're talking about.
Yeah.
When the scan that you were talking about from Eamon is showing, that's what they're showing. Networks, if you put yourself on the scanner when this is happening, the networks are lighting up.
They're starting that gap in between that little black cloud there.
Exactly.
It's like lightning and
light is coming.
And it's coming.
Yeah.
Like, as a society,
excited.
I am excited because I actually understand this stuff.
Yeah.
Because I have studied it
Sure.
for years. Another guy that talks a lot about this stuff is a guy by the name of Dr. Joe Dispenza, and he different forms of workshops, and his explanations around it have really helped me. But that's the information that we as public or as a society don't know. And that's why we just walk around the place, a lot of us, like headless chickens.
Confused,
completely confused, Donnie, not knowing what's actually going on for us, not knowing how we're actually feeling,
or how we've developed, or how we are today,
and it was wasted. I wouldn't say they're wasted lives, but like there's a lot more to life for people.
Yeah, sure.
Like, what?
I think, I mean, I'm just thinking what you're saying about that. And you see, awareness isn't the easiest job in the world either. And not being aware has a lot going for it.
Yeah, that's
and
true.
a lot of people stay not being aware.
Ignorance is bliss.
A kind of thing.
Kind of, yeah.
And the realization, like, I'll mention the work of Thomas Hubel, Hubl. I think Hubel's work is he's German. I think his work is well worth looking at. But he said that, like, what we have done is we have put it in to a deep freeze, and our job is to keep it there. And we put a lot of electricity to keep the deep freeze running. We keep the disturbance locked away. And we don't even notice there. You know, we gradually get on as if it wasn't there at all. And we're doing the best we can, and that's what we're doing. So what I'm saying is that there is definitely a shift, and people are waking up to it, and the awareness of the developmental experience and the impact it has, and trauma and all that, is growing very considerably. I suppose you were asking me at the start about what way has it evolved. There's no doubt about it that the huge game changer was neuroscience. Because when I started in 1991, it wasn't anywhere. 10 years later, it wasn't anywhere. It was beginning, of course, there was some stuff being done, but it didn't hit the ground. It didn't land until much, much more recently. And what we began to realize is that there's an innate capability. The brain remains, what they call it neuroplasticity. The brain has within itself the power to heal. And the question then is, what do we have to do to enable that to happen? And definitely, one thing you have to do is you have to have an awareness that you need to do it, that you're putting yourself forward for it. And after that, then, the various therapies that we have developed in the intervening years, many of them are very strongly geared to assist neuroplasticity. And I would say that the acid test for any therapy is if it facilitates neuroplasticity. It's an effective therapy if it facilitates the thing I'm doing with my hands.
What therapies would you think are very beneficial in that area of neuroplasticity and
Yes.
changing the neuroplasticity?
I think that I asked Daniel Siegel that question. He did a 2 or 3 day, and he said, do you think that I'm going to get myself into that much trouble now by saying that
He'd lose
one
a lot
is
of
better than another? And I think that's really important that no, I'm not trying to avoid trouble actually in this. What I'm wanting to say is I think many therapies can actually facilitate it, but the ones that are going to facilitate it the best, in my view, are ones that will reach what I call the subcortical areas, the midbrain and the brainstem. So therefore,
subconscious mind.
More the subconscious, the areas where it's held. So any therapy that involves the body has an awful lot going for it. Any therapy that includes emotions has an awful lot going for it. And then any therapy that stimulates neural firing has a lot going for it. So if I were to think about what do I use in myself, and this is not saying that others don't do the same, but I would use EMDR as a primary organizing frame. But within that, I would use, I have a background in somatic
touch.
Well, not just somatic touch, but somatic experience in generally, which includes sometimes somatic touch. And then I'd also have ego states or parts, because I think that there's no point in us thinking about the human being unless we're aware that we have kind of a multiplicity of the mind. We have different parts to ourselves that need to be invoked. But central to it all is the relationship. I would say that
the relationship between counselor and therapist.
The therapist and the client. And what I mean by that is not just that I understand you, but that there's an attunement, there's a felt connection that we can get between us. And the more the therapist is in that sort of a zone of presence, of being in touch in their own flow, and I can attune with you in the flow, there's a sense that you're not going there on your own. And the client needs to know that when they're going to these difficult, dark, challenging places, that they don't have to go there on their own. That there's somebody actually going there.
That's built in time through trust and just.
Well, it's that, but it's also built, I would claim, to what the therapist is doing with themselves. To be in our own, in the flow of our own experiencing, so that as the person is, like I was working with somebody today, and he was meeting a lot of deep pain, and I could feel the cold going down my back. And I was saying, great. Now there's a resonation happening. We were facilitating him. He was meeting quite a lot of depth of grief, and I could pick it up. Now we're resonating together.
That's a powerful experience. And is that something that frequently happens?
Yeah.
You know, and we spoke earlier on, and me as just a client, and both of you as psychotherapists, counsellors, I think that connection is absolutely critical in any form of relationship. And whereas if the client doesn't feel that that kind of connection, I wouldn't waste any time and probably move on. Now, I'm not saying run after the first half a session. I'm saying give it a bit of time, because your head can come in as well. The ego can come in at your head and tell you to run anywhere because it doesn't want to bring up stuff.
Well, I think my experience is for some people there might be some resistance to even meeting the therapist. So it could take, like I usually kind of try and give it maybe 4 or 5 sessions and we have a check and see how we're meeting each other. But
I think what Timmy is mentioning is fit.
Yeah.
This initially, the kind of sense of, are we a fit?
Yes.
With each other?
Fit, because it doesn't actually, like, it doesn't work with everybody. I think the client and for me as a client, right, and we've spoke about this before, Donald, right, because of my own experiences in life, I always look at somebody and look for the movement, look for the body movement, look for the facial expressions, look for everything, look for the energy, and I feel the energy. I feel it. So when I say something to them, I'm completely in touch with my body, waiting for, can I feel the reaction from their energy? You know, and I'm also looking at their facial expressions to see what I can get from that, and all forms of movement. And if they say something, I'm looking for what I get from that. And I'll go through that whole process, and I'll be so tuned in to this whole process. It, like for however long it takes, an hour or whatever, that I will get a full sense of where we're going within a few sessions, and whether it's going to work or not.
But the only thing I'd say to you about that is that that's setting a fairly high bar. For what I mean by that is that if you have a therapist who's learning their trade and trying to get their head around ways of facilitating, and you know they're growing their practice and so on, they can be very taken up with that, and they mightn't have the kind of be in as much tune as, like what you're describing there. The person needs to be pretty with you, and if they are, that's great. But I'm inclined to be more like, to get, if you're learning and growing and developing, it takes quite a while to get yourself enough of confidence and comfort as a therapist to be able to actually not be trying so hard.
And would that be up to maybe the client or the therapist to bring that to air, bring it out, to talk about it, maybe talk about how they're feeling, how the client is actually experiencing the session, and from the actual therapist, you know, if there's something that maybe is coming up for them, approach it instead of lodging in the head.
For me, that's an individual experience, isn't it?
Is it?
It's down to, some clients will say it like you did, and some clients won't, and some therapists will name it, and some therapists won't. But I think, like what Gus was saying, like is I know when I was starting out, I was working too hard. I always remember Gus saying, "You're working too hard," but I was working too hard too. you know.
And that's true.
Yeah.
We were all working too hard because we thought that we had to do it.
Yeah.
Now we're realizing that we facilitate them to do it. The quieter I am in many ways, the more they can actually do it. It varies from individual to individual.
And what I was going to say was, do you know, if the client is feeling something and they're the type of person that doesn't want to express it, they'll go through the whole session in their head. Whereas if they call it out and they talk about it with the therapist, it's gone and they move on. You know, and that I had to learn that, like, on a personal level. And anytime I ever talk to anybody that's going to counselling straight away, depending on the person, if I know them, I say, don't waste any time.
But you're quite an advanced client to me.
Yeah. Well, I have my moments, guys. I do have my moments, you know. And as we were speaking even earlier on there, I did mention that like I've gone back doing a little bit of EMDR, and I'm actually very, very curious of where it's going to bring me.
Sure.
You know, and I'm excited, curious, and I won't say there's any fear there, because I believe I'm strong enough to express and process whatever's going on for me. But there is a void in my childhood, right? Really, really deep void, and it's a gap, right? It's a gap where there's a gap of a blockage, a real strong blockage. And I was asked today, where do I want to go? What do I want to go? Where do I need to go? And what? And you know. And I did mention that is the area I want to go to. That is the area I need to go back to this child. I need to feel how he's feeling. I need to feel, and am I ready to go back? Like I'm 12 and a half years around this, you know. I know this stuff is not easy, but because of my memory of how this child suffered in different ways, you know, I need to feel that stuff. I don't have to go back and feel it. I know that too. I do know it. But I do love this child. I have done a lot of inner child work with this child, and it started off where this child was me, where I was a little child, would kick me, shout at me, push me away, and in the last few years I've gone back not just to the child, I've gone back to the teenager, I've gone back to the man in addiction, I've gone back to every area of my life where there's trauma, shame, fear and guilt, and loved each individual part of me at that moment in time. But this child, there's stuff went on here, particularly around the time when I wanted to end my life at about 6 or 7 years of age, where this child was so broken, you know, I mean completely broken, that I need to be able to reach out into this area, and there's a void. This is a void. It's a massive void for me. I need to be able to go back and reach out here and just make that connection and just free him. Do you know? Does that make sense?
It makes real sense. But I think what's also making even more sense is that this isn't the first time you're going back.
No.
And that's why it's so important to recognize that we do this in layers.
Yeah.
That we do this layer by layer. And that you're now after reaching a spot, from what you're saying, where you have become aware this is the next leg of the journey, is to reach,
I think so.
and to begin to reach areas that were too difficult. So if it's okay to say a tiny bit about that.
Yeah, 100%.
What I would be advising anybody is that you don't go back there, you do it from here.
Yeah.
So we never need to relive the pain of the child, but we need to be with the child
While they're reliving it.
No, but what I'm saying is that instead of reliving, we come from here. So we have one foot in the present and we reach across.
Okay.
And I'm here now anchored, but reaching across to the memory that the child's experience. And yeah, I want to see the child and I want to help them to see me. I use a mirror in the room very often. I say, look in. And the person said to me, that's not me. Okay, just see what you see. Well, it's not what I feel inside. That's not what I see in the mirror, isn't what I feel inside. We're trying to bridge between then and now. And all the work has to be done from now, but reaching across to then.
And that makes so much sense, because what we're doing in the now is because of our own experiences in the last, I'll speak about me, the last 12 years is how strong I've gotten because of all the learning about trauma and all the meditation and the allowing myself to be able to feel and process stuff, all that stuff. So, and it makes so much sense what you just said. 1 foot in the now, 1 foot there. And what I'll be doing as the adult today is going back to love and guide and just help this child that hadn't got these resources.
Right.
Whereas this person today has the resources, and they'll show them how to feel and love and process.
Well, you see, if you can do that, if you can be here and stay steady enough, and that's why I was saying it's not any accident that it's now you're doing it, because you didn't have enough resilience, I assume, or you wouldn't have had to tolerate the contact with the experience that he has been carrying.
I didn't.
Yeah,
Have
but
that.
that's right. But you shouldn't.
Yeah.
Because that has to grow, and when you grow it sufficiently, then you edge back. You begin to edge towards and say, "Can I tolerate it now?" And even as you meet it next month or whenever, you might find you're jolted, and you might have to regroup a bit, and meet it again. So it's to get enough yet able to do. I remember Bessel van der Kolk saying, he said, there are certain things that I say with caution and hesitation. He said, but this I say with absolute certainty, that trauma is resolved with the strength of the person here in the present, at the same time reaching across to the pain, the wound, the hurt of the child in the past. And if you can do that, then it's about building connection, processing the distress that the child is holding, and gradually then what you say is that the terminology we would use in the parts work is retrieval, bringing them home. There's a lovely
lovely word.
There's a lovely little program that a woman called Peggy Pace has done, and she's doing the retrieval, the timeline integration, she calls it. And so she said, okay, pick them up where they're at and start journeying on the bus, on the train, whatever, updating your experience in the light of the resources you now have. So you're updating. These are little things you can add in.
Yeah.
But the core journey of it is what you're saying, which is, I'm here enough to be able to tolerate the distress that I register when I meet these memories. It's not phasing me or spooking me anymore. I'm just about, but not. I'm not calm, cool, and collected. I'm just about able to tolerate it and meet it. And I feel the distress I feel when I do it, and coming through, releasing the emotion, shaking in the body, letting the stuff come through, and then gradually, when there's enough of ground under your feet of both of you together, you're helping the child to land inside you. Because there aren't two. There's one. You're all in the one body.
Is it similar, Gus, to I remember doing John Bradshaw's work, Homecoming?
Homecoming, yeah.
Pretty much that's what it kind of reminds me of.
Yeah.
Is you're going back and you're building a kind of relationship with the child and bringing the child back with you.
Yeah.
But you're not stepping back into the...
Exactly. Bradshaw was ahead of his time in many ways. He did it before we had a lot of the technology developed.
You've done that
Healing
book.
the shame that binds me.
Yeah.
No, you've done the homecoming book as well. I think.
Yeah. Yeah.
That where you go back and you retrieve the child and
Yeah.
build a relationship with the child.
Yes.
And
it goes from the kicking and punching and screaming to coming over to sitting on my knee, and just showing me things and playing and kicking a football.
Yeah.
Massive.
where I do find a struggle with people is there's almost, once they become aware of this work is to be done at some stage, it's almost like getting them to be patient. There's nearly a rush into it.
Yeah.
And trying to slow people down and be patient, because I think some people, they're dying to talk about everything that happened and almost nearly re-experience it and thinking that's the... So hopefully this will be helpful to people to say, I think just be patient. And
without a doubt.
Patience, and even be patient in building a relationship with your therapist. Just patience is my kind of...
And time.
And time and safety.
It's all about time.
So I'll say something about that if it's okay, because particularly EMDR has got a reputation for being very fast. It'll do it very quickly. Well, that can happen very effectively if you have had a road traffic accident, or you've been mugged in the street, or some one-off traumatic event. That can be cleared very quickly, all other things being equal. But for what it's worth to say, EMDR therapy with developmental trauma needs to be done very, very slowly.
Okay.
Because it's for the reasons we have just been saying. We have to do it layer by layer. We can't go to it. If you go to it and your system isn't ready to hold it, it'll just kick you back in the face. So you're not progressing that way. Then you say, oh, no, that stuff doesn't work.
Yeah. Like even what you said there about being ready for it, like this has never came up as much as it has now. I've never really gave any of this thought before. This is really just happening to me at the moment, where I'm having these kind of internal kind of visions about re-meeting stuff, and I'm not going looking for this stuff. It's just like it's coming to me.
Exactly.
And it's and I take it as a sign, because I do trust my own intuition. I have whereas years ago I didn't even know what intuition was. Your gut, my instincts, and I do follow them. Whereas before I wouldn't have really trusted anything like that unless it was something that I found to be said by somebody I trusted or whatever. But now I'm actually starting to trust my own instincts in how I feel in around people, around different groups of people or settings. You'll feel the energy. Mm-hmm. You can feel it, and the energy can sometimes can be nice, be really relaxing energy, and sometimes the energy can be not so nice.
Yeah.
And you can feel like there's something maybe going on here, and usually it's the other person in the head and probably feeling the same way in relation to something that's going on. Mm-hmm. And we can feel that. Before I would have looked upon that as in there's something wrong with me. Mm-hmm. Whereas today I look upon that and I say, okay, there's something going on here.
So you need to learn from.
Yeah. I'm feeling it. I can feel it. Or somebody else is there, I look into it, maybe what's going on, and I approach it in a different way. Not in the other way, the violence or the fucking quick reaction where I'm verbally assaulting or someone or blackening them out of my life. You're gone, do you get me? Mm-hmm. And I have to learn. And you also have to learn as well, where is that person coming from? Mm-hmm. Look at my part. What did I do? Did I do something here? Mm-hmm. Because we fucking like to always believe we're right, don't we?
You do our best anyway.
But listen, if we just move on a small bit from all that stuff, Gus, and just maybe break down a little bit of the last 30 odd years you've been working in this area, nearly 40, and how it has completely transformed from your belief systems around psychotherapy and counselling back then to what it actually is now, and how it has actually just completely blossomed and opened up, and how we're actually learning so much from it, the new stuff that's coming out as a collective.
Sure. And, many of us started with very much a Rogerian, Carl Rogers thing of, he said there were 3 core conditions: empathy, unconditional positive regard, and what he called congruence or realness. And he said, if you have those, you'll be fine. And if you're short of them, the therapy needs to give them to you, and then you'll have them. Now, then he said, very, we'll say bold statement, these are the necessary and sufficient conditions for therapeutic change. And what do we think about that today? We think that actually, I still believe they're necessary, but I never was convinced that they were sufficient, because there is, as the science has progressed, we began to become aware much more of neuroscience, and we began to become aware, I suppose this is the key from the point of view of people listening, is it's when I was starting in the early days, the brain was not a central force in therapy. The brain was for medicine. We did the mind, we did emotions, we did thoughts, we did actually even then the body wasn't big. Yeah. The body has become in the intervening years, the role of the body has become much more central. So I would say that in the evolution of over the years, the first step was the builder. I used to joke, say, what was the model of therapy I started with? And it was, have chairs, we'll talk. Sit down, talk and listen. Yeah. The talking therapy, the listening therapy. And Rogers was the frame that I was using for that. Others in other schools beside me at the time were learning more from the cognitive and behavioral model. I dipped into it without ever making it a central force, and it never became a central element in the CIT training and in the program we developed around it. The next place I went to after that was to ego states, and the very start of that was with transactional analysis, parent, adult, and child, and all of that. And that was a kind of an unfolding that led me on from that into a lot of the kind of, say, ego state work that was done by others. John and Helen Watkins, they did a lot of ego states. And then finally, I suppose I would say the work of Richard Swartz, internal family systems. That's very, very user-friendly. And it helps us to get access to parts of ourselves in a kind of a user-friendly way that you can do very quickly. So that was a very big part of the evolution, and the people in the training got the benefit of that. We brought Swartz to Ireland, and we did a lot of training. He did a lot of training with us, and then we passed it on to the students and so on. The next part along the way for me would have been the body. Okay. And we were fortunate that we had some people in our training who had a background in body work. Not body work, but somatic psychotherapy. And through that, I began to say, this is something I need to do. And I did. We had a very fine journey up in the north coast of Antrim for over 2 years, where there was a training in somatic experiencing. And what's fascinating to me was that as soon as I started, or as gradually as I started to do the somatic experiencing training myself, the clients started to have body responses, as if they never had them before. Yeah, it's a bit like when the pupil. What is it?
When the pupil's ready, when the teacher's ready, the pupil will appear. That's
right. Yeah. When the teacher is ready, the pupil will appear. So that's the body thing. And then, of course, as I've said a lot, the role of EMDR is the most recent of the evolutions for me, but is now 25 years old. So it isn't recent anymore. And that has provided, I think, a very good fit for what I spoke about earlier, the integration of the neuroplasticity in a very kind of, it's a kind of a dynamic way. So if somebody would say to me, would you do body work on its own? I would say I wouldn't. I do body work in conjunction or as a dimension of doing EMDR therapy. The somatic and the parts are integrated with it. And all through, I would have said the relationship. From Rogers, in very early days, we became much more aware of the depth of the unconscious relationship, what's being played out between us in the room. You know, what the unconscious way. I was working with a guy who had, he lost his father was killed when he was quite young. And he had a lot of emptiness inside. And I remember working with him for a year. And there was something about the connection we had between us. It was like father and son.
Yeah.
And there was a definite sense that he could be as bolshy as he liked, and it didn't bother me. Whereas somebody else mightn't. I might have a reaction to them. Yeah. And other days he could be as sweet as pie, and he'd go anywhere between the two. But he made and again, we worked with his body, we worked using the EMDR process, we worked with his parts, but the relationship was a kind of a force in its own right. So that's the way I would think about it today. There are new kids emerging. The whole psychedelics is hitting the block in more recent times. It's not an area that I have any familiarity with yet, but there's somebody I know who has taken an experience of it, and she thinks she's amazed by it.
I have experienced them on a personal level
Yeah.
as well. I've experienced ayahuasca. And, it has
Microdosing as well.
Microdosing, yeah. But the ayahuasca brings you to, none of them are a long-term solution. None of them are. They'll give you insight and information that you need to maybe move onto, like for me, I experienced unconditional love. I experienced love for the first time in my life. I might have experienced it before, but I didn't know what it was because I didn't experience it as a child. You know, that was mind-blowing for me. I cried during that experience and hugged myself for about 3 to 4 hours during the experience. That was the first night. A lot of information came up for me about my life as well. I had no clue, and I integrated the next day. Second session then, it was a 3-night, I experienced the healing in my body. It stopped there. It healed my whole legs. There was this green wave of energy coming from my head, but it stopped there. It was like it's hitting, it just went hard. And that down here is your kind of lower center where we store a lot of fucking resentment, anger, rage, all these different things. And it made sense to me. I didn't question it. I just knew what it was, and I knew where I was stuck, and I would do it. The third night, I got sick for 4, 5, 6 hours. Just got sick into it, and it just felt like it was. It didn't
discharging
feel,
something.
It was just stuff. They do massively help. Okay, you take things home from them. But what I've always noticed, as in for me, which was always going to be the long-term solution, was the continuous meditation practice. Without any shadow of a doubt. It was just continuous. Once I continued to just be on that practice of meditation on a daily basis and just continuously check in with my body in the morning and how I'm feeling, and my mind, what kind of state it's in, it has absolutely always helped me. Always. But there are them psychedelics are definitely a big deal. I know there's a lot of people doing the microdosing, as you said, Donald, but a lot of people over in America, they're using ketamine. Tony, we spoke about that last year.
Very big in India.
In India, is it?
They use it intravenously.
Yeah.
Very effective. A one-time dose is one of the most effective things for depression cessation.
Yeah. MDMA has been used as well now quite a lot.
Well, Jesus, like, fuck it, it's only obvious. MDMA is going to really change your life.
100%,
Because
yeah.
when I was young, that was the first drug I took,
loved.
and I never, ever felt as
Loving.
ever felt like that.
Yeah.
I could have fucking hated you with a passion because you probably bullied me or done something to me growing up. And if I was on MDMA, I would fucking hug the life out of you and tell you how it was just one of those drugs. And I think everybody should experience MDMA in their lifetime, whether
The only
I
thing
swear
I
to God.
suppose we would want to say about it is that
I'd
we
probably
want
get
to
kicked
know
over
that we're in
now,
the
though.
right hands.
Yeah, exactly.
In the right hands, yeah, and it's facilitated.
Yeah.
Things
And that
have to be facilitated, Gus.
There's a professional frame around anything. And like, as I say, I don't know actually anything about it in direct experience. But what I'm picking up about it from people is that actually it's not so much the free feeling, the high feeling that you're looking for from it. It's that it actually facilitates neuroplasticity.
Okay.
It seems to, that's what the research, I was looking at some of the research about it, because you asked me about it the last time I was here. So I said, I better have it, say, I did something in the meantime. But it's on my to-do list to look into it a bit more. There's a colleague of mine in Northern Ireland who is doing some research on it at the moment. And as far as I know, one aspect of the emerging awareness is that it seems to, done professionally with very, very careful management, that it can assist in the facilitation of neuroplasticity. And what you were describing sounds a bit like that.
Absolutely. Like I done the ayahuasca again afterwards. The experience was completely different. The setting was different. The people that were facilitating were different.
You were different.
Yes.
There's that as well.
Yeah. So, yeah,
And that part is important for me.
I was most definitely different,
Yeah.
and that's a good point to make because I wasn't as in tune as I was the first time.
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't as accepted of the whole process as I was the first. The second time I was rushing to get there.
Yeah.
My life was all over the place.
See, there's so many variables. I think it can't be one for everyone. It's and there has to be lots and lots of research, and people are kind of really encouraging at the moment. I'm saying err on the side of caution because there's too many variables.
Too many.
Individuals. For me, I know it wouldn't be for me. Life for me is very, very, very good at the moment. Why would I want to chance something
Yes.
that might make my life better or might make my life 100 times worse? There's just too many variables. And I'm not condemning anything or saying it doesn't work. It does with research, but I think you have to be cautious about everything. And that's kind of where I am with it.
You most definitely do when things start to get commercialized as well, don't you? Like when
And things get pushed. And
you get pushed by because of financials. People wanting money to be made out of it. That's when things really get pushed.
Can I just ask Gus one? Because I'm just conscious of time, if you don't mind. Just one last question for Gus. Do you know, Tim was talking a minute ago about his experience with therapists and kind of what he looks for and doesn't look for. And I suppose my concern at the moment is people who've never been to a therapist or people who are thinking about going to a therapist or a counsellor. Or could you, Gus, you've years of experience, just give us some small bit of guidance of what you might, just something kind of off the top of your head to say that look out for this or that, or what would you recommend, or something at all of my guide, just the lay individual as they're going along looking for a therapist. And
Well, I mean, there are a few things I would say in very short. One is see if you can find some way that a person can be recommended. In other words, ask around and see who have been. I get calls. I'd say probably every day. Would you recommend? Can you see me? No, I can't have daily space. And would you have somebody that you could recommend? Now, I find that not easy because, I don't have as much detailed knowledge of people and how they work and all that, but I think that's one way. The second thing I think you'd want to think about then is get a meeting. it's a bit like what Timmy is saying. You see, you need to suss each other out and see, are we? And I think a quality of kind of presence and maturity. They used to say, we had three headings. One, are they likable? Are they trustworthy? Would you, have they your back? And do they seem to know what they're doing? They would probably be the three. Can we get on together? Would I feel they have my back? And do they seem to know their business? They probably aren't so far away from it. Yeah.
And you as the client as well, you'll feel it. You'll know it.
Yeah.
But you see, I think what I run into problem with people is that they go in trusting that this is a professional, and if they have some form of self-doubt, so I think those 3 points would be very, very useful, because a lot of people I meet, they have doubt, and they're saying, well, they're the professional, I must be wrong, so I'm going to stick with them because...
Yeah.
And it doesn't work out.
That's a valid
So
point.
if you have those 3 points, kind of stick to that, and maybe be that your rule of thumb, and you're at the races.
Important information. Thank you, Gus. And listen, I would definitely reaffirm what you just said, and I'm sure you would too. Listen, thank you so much for joining us, Gus. It was an absolute pleasure. And you seem to be getting younger as well. You actually look younger than the last time I see you.
Actually, now I got my hair cut yet.
And the glasses, you probably got the younger set of glasses as well. But listen, it's been a pleasure, and thank you so much, not just for coming here, but for all your work in MTU and bringing EMDR to Ireland and just making it a big deal, because it's absolutely changing people's lives.
Changing everything.
It is, and you need to be commended. You need to be held up for that, and I appreciate it. And listen, thanks to Donald for being a co-host, and thank you, and thanks to Tony, lads.
Thanks, Listen, again.
Thanks to everybody again for listening, and listen, I'm blown away. It was a great podcast, a lot of information there today from Gus, Donald and myself, so I just want to wish everybody the best, and God bless. Thank you.